Today, we're going to talk about all the things you didn't know that happen legally behind the scenes on most major productions. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Break into Law School. I'm your host, Lavetta Jenkins, and today we are talking to Ke'Andra Levingston, one of the best type of lawyers, in my opinion, only because she merges her career and my career at the same time. She's a business affairs executive on television for one of the three biggest talent agencies in Hollywood. Thank you so much for being here with me today, Ke'Andra.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Listen, your field is probably one that is closer to mine, so I'm really interested into getting into all of this. So tell me how you got where you are and what sparked you to get into law.
For sure. Well, two things. I'll say when I was growing up, I grew up on the Cosby Show. So Felicia Rashad, I thought was the most beautiful, elegant, well-spoken woman, and just kind of the image of what you would want to grow up and be as a Black woman, a mom. And she happened to be a lawyer. And that was my first image of what a lawyer, particularly as a Black woman, looked like. I didn't know any lawyers growing up. I'm originally from a small town, and just from Texas in general. So I never grew up around lawyers, particularly lawyers that looked like me. So she was my first real image that sparked that in my mind. But I actually didn't really know I wanted to go to law school until much later in life, even though that was an early spark. I went to law school kind of as a means to an end. So I'm a person who long term wants to be a CEO and some other things, but law was really a conduit for that, mainly because I looked at people like Deborah Lee and Charles King and other sort of key Black executives in the business. And a central thread to their career journeys where all of them happened to be folks who were lawyers. So that's how I ended up in law school and in this line of work.
So it's crazy that you started off, you like got your inspiration from the Cosby Show, and now you're not only a lawyer like Claire Huxtable, but you're
Mhm.
also a lawyer for one of the three big talent agencies in Hollywood. So you've done both. You've taken the love of the show and law and put them together. How has that been for you, stepping into this role? And I can only imagine one of very few African American women.
Very few. That is definitely an accurate assessment. It's been a real joy in a lot of ways, like you said, just fusing together so many aspects of what I personally love. I'm a creative at heart, so I was an English major in college, always been a writer, into music, all these things. And to be able to do something that uses the business side of my brain and also the creative side of my brain in terms of working in an industry that meshes the two together has been a blessing and a real joy. I think it's definitely to your point about being one of the only Black women. It goes without saying, it comes with great costs. Almost always the only one in the room. And if there is someone else, we're usually, one or two of us. And that's definitely a hard place to be for sure. But it's manageable. And I take it very seriously that me being in those rooms helps to open doors for other people.
Absolutely. And that's the thing about being the only in a place. If you do your job well and you inspire those around you, just like we do here at Breaking the Law School, you can make sure that 10 years from now, there's more than, and you've opened the door for other people. So, like I said, merging what I do and what you do and put it all together, I've known because I have a degree in film that there's a lot of little intricate things that happen behind the scene. What is a typical day to day life like in the life of you working in Hollywood?
For sure. Well, I'll say this, it differs based on what you're doing, at that time. So I've had other kinds of jobs in TV that were different in some ways and similar in some ways. But right now, what I do as a television business affairs executive is I work on deals basically for all different types of talent. People hear the word talent and they automatically think of, the person singing or the person acting in front of the camera. And they very much are talent. But there's also other types of talent. There are writers, producers, directors, and other folks who are, providing services on all the projects that you see on television and in film. And we do deals for all of those folks. So I might be doing a deal for an actor in one moment, but then I'm also probably later in the day doing a deal for a producer or a production company. Or I may be sitting and thinking about strategy about how we approach certain deals at particular types of studios that I cover, thinking about strategy for the agency business overall. So it varies quite widely. Because I now sit on the talent representation side of the business, I'll mention kind of the difference between the two. So when you're doing a negotiation, you have two different sides. So one person is representing one side, the other person is representing the other side. And I've been on both sides of the table, but I happen to be on the talent representation side of the business now, which I think is really fun because as a person who is a creator, it's always nice to be able to advocate for the people who are making their creative vision go from their mind, if they're like a writer or they're producing something or whatever it is that they're doing, helping to bring not only their vision to life through creating a deal for them, but also making sure that they're paid at the rates that they should be paid and that they have everything part of their deal that they should.
I like that. So, with that being said, I'm quite sure it takes a little bit of a different skill set depending on what you're doing. You wouldn't handle a person's deal the same way you would, say, a dog. So, have you ever had to manage, an animal or, work on a deal for an animal?
So it's interesting you asked that. So part of my background is I come from the production side of things, as I mentioned. So I'm at an agency now, but I've previously worked in non-scripted television production. And so when I was a production attorney, there's so many different legal issues that may come into play depending on the type of show that you work on. So for example, if you work on a show where you have a cast that's living in a house together, there are very different issues and complexities that can come about from that show versus a show that may be in a studio set, but maybe it involves minors, right? And so there are legal issues that go into that. Then you may have a completely different show that's true crime and it's talking about a real life situation where somebody may be on trial and there's all kinds of implications for the business that you have to manage. And so I use those as a few different examples of what you might face as a production lawyer, particularly in the non-scripted space. And so to your question about like animals, so one of the things that happens, which is kind of fun, but also sometimes nerve wracking for lawyers, is that creatives are just that creatives. I understand because I am one, but we're people with big ideas. And what the lawyers in the room, our job is, to really assess in totality, not only how we get the thing done in terms of the deal making, but also assessing risk and making sure that the company is protected as much as we can be, because if the company's not protected, the show doesn't get made, nobody has jobs, like the show never makes it out if the business isn't where it needs to be. And so a lot of what I would do in that context is listening to the creative from the producers, from the team, and figuring out what it was they were trying to do. And then how do we bring that to life to make sure that we can get as much of that done as possible, but also assessing risk. And so one of the things that came up a few times actually in my prior work is that sometimes they may want to go horseback riding or they want to go to a reptile farm or something that's creative. I worked on a show where they were road tripping and they would stop at all these like cool, funky different places across the country. One of them was a ranch. And so people look at that and see it on TV and it's just like, oh, this is a cool thing. What they don't realize is that somebody, if the job is being done well, has an agreement to make sure that whoever is managing those horses, there's, like an animal wrangler type of agreement. That's an example of something that you might see. And that's to make sure of a few basic things, right? Like, God forbid, if something happens, we send people horseback riding and the horse kicks somebody, or, you put your crew and your on-camera talent in an environment with animals. Are these animals, do they have their shots, right? Like, is it safe for them to be around? Like, if something happens, what is then the recourse? Who's responsible? You know what I mean? What horses are they trained? Or all of these different kinds of questions that aren't necessarily intuitive to the average person. The production lawyer has to be thinking ahead about those things, because the worst thing in the world is that your crew and your on-camera talent is not protected as much as they can be. Things happen, but you have to be able to manage risk. And a lot of that is just being forward thinking. So it's not that you tell them, oh, no, you can't do that because something bad might happen. That's not the right answer. The right answer is, We can find a way to do that, but we do need to make sure there are some precautions in place, that this is a reputable company, they have insurance, you know what I mean? All those kinds of questions. And certainly that has come up in the context of animals.
So I have a question in my mind now. We see countless reality shows where, as you said, they could be road tripping or, hey, let's try something different. One of my favorite rappers, Cardi B, was doing this thing called Cardi Tries, and she would do all these
Mhm.
different things. And I've seen it in the past with like T.I.'s wife, Tiny, or, Paris Hilton. They go to like a farm. So you mean somebody has to be in charge of the chickens and make sure that, if I want to hold a chicken, the chicken is 100% healthy?
Right. Well, as much as we can say, like for example, if you have a dog and you have to make sure your dog has shots, it's like basic stuff like that. And so what again, if the job is being done correctly, what a production lawyer should be doing is making sure that a couple things are happening, right? So we'd have something like an animal wrangler agreement, which would be basically in place to say who's responsible for these animals, right? We're not going to just send them out into the wild and there's like all kinds of, you know what I mean, just random person with their random animals. None of the animals are vaccinated. You know what I mean? We don't know if they've had safety issues in the past. And so we have what's called reps and warranties. Reps and warranties is basically whoever is, you're doing the agreement with is saying, I'm telling you as part of this agreement, I'm basically assuring you that these things are true, right? So I want to make sure that horse hasn't been violent or that dog or whatever hasn't been violent towards other people, right? Because you don't want an incident to happen and then you find out they've had 20 incidents in the past and no one even did any kind of due diligence or anything like that. So you'd have that other party like rep and warrant certain things. You'd also have them do what's called an indemnification. So they're indemnifying you, which basically means they're holding you harmless if certain types of things happen. And so the context of what would go into all that without going into the weeds too far would differ based on whatever the actual agreement, show, whatever the context is. But I say all that to say that the lawyer is really thinking about what are the key things we need to be mindful of. Safety is one, you know what I mean? Risk management for the business is one, because ideally we want our crew and our talent to get in and get out safely and with good content that we can use for a good show.
So I definitely remember the hold harmless agreements that I had to have everybody sign when I
Mhm.
was in film school and in college. And I remember how tedious all that was. But now
Mhm.
knowing that it was literally to protect not just, the person, but the company as well, you've
Mhm.
really got to make sure that you're crossing every T, dotting every I. And I think you mentioned looking at all the risks of it because yeah, it might be fun to go, ride with some of these dolphins, but we got to make sure some of these dolphins have never been violent. What happens if you do find out that, this dog or this, whatever animal has had a little problem in the past? Is it completely a no, or can you get them to provide a different animal? How does that work?
I actually have not had a situation where we've had a violent animal. I would say in general, if we were to find out in advance that an animal had been violent, it would be a no because the risk to the crew and the talent would be too great. Especially because with animals, you can replace. I mean, you can get another horse or you could get another dog or whatever that isn't necessarily has a violent history. Now, what I think is beneath your question, I'll answer is situations where there's like a tricky thing and a balance. So I'll give you another example beyond just animals. One of the things we also used to do for certain shows and production is like background and psych reports. So for certain types of shows, for example, if you have like a cast that's living in a house together, there's any number of shows. I won't name the ones that I worked on, but there's any number of shows you can think about where you have cast that live in a house together for a period of time. And what would be reckless and irresponsible would be to just throw a bunch of random people in a house, not do any kind of due diligence, and then you don't know what's going to happen, right? You have to have some level of we're doing things from a precautionary basis to make sure that if there are issues with mental illness, violence, weapons, all of these different things, that we are at least taking responsible measures before we put people in there, as well trying to protect them, right? If someone is not mentally stable, you don't want to put them in an environment and then put them on national television to be scrutinized in a way that, you know what I mean? Like it's all a balance. But in as much as you're managing risk management is more of an art than a science, right? So, there's a show that I worked on where the whole premise of the show was broken people trying to get put back together. We'll say it like that, right? And so, if the people that you are targeting in terms of the casting process, they have to be these kind of damaged, I shouldn't say damaged, but broken people with a lot of issues. And what comes with that oftentimes is criminal background, you know what I mean, potentially psych issues. And so it's not to say that if there are flags that come up that they don't ever make it on screen, because sometimes that's the whole point of why they're on screen is because of whatever it is that they did. But it's being able to understand from a removed basis. Like, I don't know these people, I'm not judging them, like, but I'm looking and seeing in context, I'm looking at their psych report in context with their background, right? So they may have had some things in their past, but how recent is it, right? Like, was it in a situation where they were in a bar fight when they were 18 and now they're 35? You know what I'm saying? And the relative risk of that, you have to make that assessment. So it's like I said, it's more of an art than a science, but it's a very important job, and it can be the difference between people having a safe and workable experience in the workplace or not. And so it's something that you have to take really seriously.
I always wondered if
Mhm.
somebody somewhere was doing psych reports
Yeah.
because I'm a fan of reality TV and I see some of the situations and I'm like, and once again, we're not going to say who or which one,
Right.
but you see the situations where everybody's put into the pot and
For
you
sure.
see one that you're wondering, like, didn't nobody vet this person? Like, it's
Mhm.
a little different. So I'm glad to know that somebody is looking at, the intricate details. What did you go to jail for? How long ago was it? Was it a violent crime or something of that nature? Or do you need to go, talk to the lady, as they say sometimes?
Right, exactly.
It's a really delicate balance, especially when you're working on a show with broken people. They
Mhm.
need to come and talk
Right.
to the lady, and the only way we can get them there is if they've had a little bit of a past, but we just can't be violent. How do they handle it? And this is just a merely superficial want to know question.
Sure.
How do they handle it when there's like a fight on reality TV?
Mhm.
Do we sign waivers for that just in case? And that's just for somebody out here who watches it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So that is the answer is it's very complicated and involves a lot of things. So to answer the latter part of your question, anybody, again, every show is different in quality in terms of the production company that produces. So I can't speak for every single show because sometimes people cut corners. The companies that I have worked for, we did not cut corners and we did things by the book. And it's very rare, honestly, that these kinds of things actually happen. But people already have agreements in place, right? So there are already signed agreements that have any number of different sort of protection language in them. But from a practical perspective, majority of the time there's security on set. So the ideal thing is if something happens, people are human and stuff can happen. So the job of security, the people who are there, the producers, is to mitigate immediately, right? So what you sometimes will see even on all kinds of different shows on TV, you'll see like people in the all black outfits and they jump out and they like pulling people apart. Those people are security for the show. You know
Right.
what I mean? They're there for the event. And usually if there are tensions of a particular type that are rising with people that we know are kind of hot-headed. You will usually have security be closer to certain types of conversations that are going to happen for that very reason, right? So there's a mitigation. Obviously, the goal is to completely avoid. So if you see it kind of leading up to that, you're supposed to pull it back, have people cool down, step away. But people are human, things happen. And so the goal next is mitigation, making sure everybody's okay and stopping further issues. And then post that, there's an analysis and assessment about what happens next. Oftentimes that person, if somebody instigated or they were the person who started whatever it was, they can be pulled from the show. That happens a fair amount where you'll see somebody that they get taken off the show because they did something kind of crazy or whatever. So there's an assessment of what the response is in proportion to whatever it is that happened.
Okay, I've always wondered that. So I'm glad you explained that to me because as a person who watches it, you just think like, "Oh wow." Like I know that the talk show I watched in high school and you might have seen when you were much younger. I know that talk show with the flying. I knew that
Yes.
you have some serious stuff going on there. I knew
Yes. And
it.
every show is different in terms of the quality of the team behind it. I'll put it that way
Mhm.
because I watch things sometimes and I'm like, if I was the production legal on that show, that would have never happened
Mhm.
that way. Some things you can't control, but some things are very controllable. And I think there are greater and lesser quality of productions, and that reflects all the way across, including into what happens in those scenarios for
And I
sure.
think sometimes the show is kind of built around that little environment. So that one, I can only imagine how it is
For
handling
sure.
all of the details for that. What would you say to someone who's thinking of going to law school and may want to get into, entertainment law and really kind of get their hands dirty in that kind of market as well?
Mhm.
What would you say to somebody?
Sure. I would say get curious about the actual business of entertainment. So there are so many people I talk to, I mentor, etc., who I want to get entertainment. I want to get entertainment. And that's great. We all have a spark. For me, like I said, it was Felicia Rashad in the Cosby Show. But everybody has that spark, and that's totally fine. But the reality is it's a business. And if you're expecting to go to work and everything is going to be furs and, fancy stuff and glisten and shine, that is not the reality of this business.
No.
It is a grind, and production in particular is a grind. It's hard work. Production is long days, and if you're a lawyer, you are in the flow of all the things that it takes to make that happen. But I would say get curious about the business. One of the things that was recommended to me when I was a law student, coming from a background where I didn't know anybody in entertainment, I didn't know any lawyers, and was about reading what's called the trades. Every industry has like trade magazines, things of that nature. But in the entertainment business, there are a few big ones that I recommend young people who are interested to just read it like you would read the New York Times. You don't need to read every article, but start getting a sense of like, what are the kinds of things that people in the business talk about, right? So you'll start seeing things like what big companies are merging, what companies talking about buying another company. You'll start to see about the shows that are attaching actors and producers and directors long before you see it on the streamer or in the movie theater. You'll see, hey, Idris Elba attached to, and then you'll read the article and you'll see who Idris Elba is rep by, who's his agency, who's his lawyer, those sorts of things that start getting you attuned to the language of the business, the players of the business in terms of the agencies, the key law firms, the key management companies. And so some that I would recommend, like Hollywood Reporter, Deadline, Variety, those are some of the bigger ones. And even now, being in the business, I read the Hollywood Reporter Digest every day. It's my way of like understanding what's happening around me. And it's a great foundation of learning what the business is actually like. If you're a music person, read Billboard, read some of these other industry magazines or online resources that can help you start to develop a foundation. And the second thing I would do is talk to people. Don't be afraid to ask your questions, but try your best to be as informed as possible because you get more from those conversations. Go to events and then try to connect with people who are there, not just the speakers, although you can connect with those folks too, but also connect with your peers who are there, other people who are there to get information, to learn, because everybody that you connect with at every level, as you rise, they will be rising too.
I absolutely love that because I feel like you are telling them to not just network, but
Mhm.
to learn the language before you get there. So that way, when you get there, it's not some big shock and you don't have to look around wondering, okay, now what was that? And
Mhm.
I am a person who reads the Hollywood Reporter as well, simply
Mhm.
because it works for my other side of my life. And you're right. Once you know who's connected to who, what a publicist actually does. There's a lot of people who say, "Oh, well, yeah, so and so has a publicist." Well, do you know what a publicist actually does? Because this is what they do, and this is what they don't do, and this here is handled by an agent. There's a lot of moving parts in here, and because you've worked on both the production side and the talent side, what strengths or weaknesses can you say? Well, let's go with strengths. Can you
Mhm.
say really work well in each different side? Can you describe that for us?
For sure. I would say, especially in production, if you are malleable, if you are a person who can be a jack or Jill of all trades and just be able to be in dynamic environments, production is a great place for you. Some of the things that I love the most can also be the most stressful about production. It's like it's pros and cons, right? The pro is that you are in the heart of making the actual thing, right? So you are close to your producers, you're close to, oftentimes I was on set, I traveled all over the country, I even went to Europe for a show one time. And so, you are in the meat of what it means to make a show. And I love that. I miss that actually a lot. The downside is that when you are in the thick of it, you also are in the thick of it, which means when something happens, it's not a 9 to 5 type of thing. But I'll say that frankly, that's true of pretty much any legal job. It's not a 9 to 5 type of career. It is a very, very demanding job. But I think the reward in production is that you really get to be part of the thing. You get to, when I was in production legal, once the show that I've been working on comes out, I see my name in the credits. You know what I mean? And there's a sort of thing of being able to see yourself as part of the work as it gets completed, which is really powerful. And so if you're a more creative person, you like to be closer to the actual art of it all, I'd say production is a great place, especially to start your career. I think the talent representation side is, if you're a person who really, really likes advocating for people, individuals, and seeing them develop and grow their financial and their business, range and scope, I think that can be a great place, especially if you're a person who really is a strategic thinker. You like to think bigger about not just how deals are done today, but how things can be done in the future and how can we build business, not only for an individual but for the agency overall. I think talent representation can be an excellent way to be a strategic thinker. So I like both things, you know what I mean? They both exercise similar parts of the brain in some ways, but also pull on different areas as well.
I love that. Well, how would someone go about, like, say, if they wanted to ask you a question, how would anybody reach you if they wanted to just say, "Hey, I want to get in. Can you give me some tips or pointers?"
Yeah, they can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I mean, as long as you have the right spelling of my name, which is the hardest part. um, you can just search me on LinkedIn and send me a DM and I will respond. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
What I would say is the easiest thing in terms of that kind of outreach for not just me, but for anybody you want to
Mhm.
connect with in the business is to do enough research about them, about where they work, so
Mhm.
that you can actually get something out of the conversation. And you can also be more memorable to the person that you're speaking to, so that when opportunities come up, you are automatically top of mind because they remember, oh, this person reached out to me and they have an interesting perspective and they had great
Mhm.
questions. And I think they show a real interest and hunger than just kind of, I like entertainment. I think entertainment is cool. Like, tell me how to do your job.
I love that. Thank you so much,
Oh, of
Keandra,
course.
for being my guest today. We really appreciate this wonderful conversation, and I know we're going to have you back again. Thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.